Well, that didn't take very long, now did it? Hello everybody, it's iFlamingo Ready here speaking to all once again, and welcome back to another Magical Girl podcast video. Yeah, I should probably make this announcement while I still can, but really, you're probably not going to look forward to what I'm about to say here, but it is relevant about this month anyways. You may have realized that the last video I have done, I only hinted that there was going to be a Magical Girl podcast video, and you might probably wonder. Well, that's because during that time period, I was still deciding about what Magical Girl show I was. But that was far from the only thing that I also didn't hint at as well. See, if it wasn't clear already, it's already June, and what that means for me is that that's a bad news situation coming on my end. See, in case you guys haven't been following me until this year, or maybe haven't been catching up at all for a while, or maybe forgotten, whichever the case, I don't really do videos that much during the summertime. It's not that I don't like doing these videos during the summertime, but when you're someone like me who has a job, and what's more, I'm mostly getting to work every Thursday, if anything, then chances are I'm probably not going to make that much videos anyways. I am trying to do whatever I can to have you guys support my channel more and to put out as much videos as I can to have more content to devour. But the thing is, summertime is just not a great time for me to do videos, period. I would do something about it, but I'm trying everything I can. So if I ever do videos during this time period out in the summertime, it's gonna have to be shortened up a little bit if I can. Though, given my Magical Girl podcast, I figured I might as well do shorter Magical Girl shows. And to be honest, those are probably a lot easier for me to do anyways, considering that they're really short enough for me to do. But that's not the only thing. I would talk about other topics, which I have two in the works to come in limbo, but I'll have to see when I have the chance to do a rundown with those videos as well. And as for live streams, yeah, I'm not so sure when to put those out, considering that my schedule can be a bit wonky even nowadays. Not just working on Thursdays, but as well as working on other days, because my schedule can be a bit of tight times. Just hopefully that person that doesn't ask me to end myself as anything to judge by. But without anything else, yeah, I'm not letting that go if you think I am. But regardless, I think it's only fitting to say, without further ado, it's time now. Let's talk about the Magical Girl podcast video with a short Magical Girl show. In this case, let's go back to the 90s. Again. Look, I have nothing against the 90s when it comes to Magical Girl shows, but the more you think about it, the more you start realizing, yeah, this is where a lot of people keep experimenting more Magical Girl shows as time goes on. But the thing is, however, if anything, I feel like a lot of them get underplayed at times because Sailor Moon was really hitting the spotlight. Whether it's due to the fact people are still calling these shows rip-offs, no, I'm not letting that go, or the fact that they're just so underplayed that you've probably forgotten them until they existed, and one of those shows that I completely forgot, or at least I didn't know existed until now, was the show that we're looking at today, Magic Users Club. Yeah, this is one that I haven't seen yet, or at least I probably didn't put on my watch list. Released in the 1990s, the show itself actually did manage to have a small, yet cult following as time goes on anyways. I'm sure there are some people out there who probably have watched it, though there are some people who have talked about it, even though it's a sleeper hit them more than anything. And you might think that saying that's underrated while doing that is a bit of a stretch, but honestly, I wouldn't know it either way. Because consider this. Magic Users Club actually did get a 7 DVD set, but unfortunately, if you're gonna find these, the only way you can find these is through eBay, and most of the time they're used copies. So yeah, you're pretty much going to find copies that were already released outside of that, but beyond that, you're not going to find a Blu-ray or physical release during nowadays. The series itself is even harder to find these days if you try to find other copies of it, but that's not the only problem with it. And I'm not just saying that because a lot of people will say that DVDs don't last forever, which, yeah, given the fact that they do wear out their welcome if you binge through the series or anything, if you have an addiction for it, you'll watch it over and over again. But here's another thing I didn't realize when checking in the series. This series also had a manga after the anime. There was also a manga series that came out after the series has ended, but this time you're gonna find it in both the shoujo and shonen category. But once again, this is one of those cases where it's harder to find, even nowadays. But taking that in with a grain of salt, because while I admit that manga are pretty much harder to find from old classics, especially this one, it goes without saying that it's pretty hard to find a lot of this stuff even nowadays. Especially because the manga itself actually had two writers her writing this year's series. One that was mostly made for the shoujo demographic, and the other one being for the shonen demographic. But given the fact that this year's series is both demographics in there, it's pretty rare to see that. I'm pretty sure there are some manga out there that have both demographics, but still, having a both shoujo and shonen series is actually kind of rare, even back animation wise. We got our old friends from Triangle Staff again, which is a studio that I've already brought up in my Shamanic Princess video, but there was another studio that was behind this after the OVAs were ending and went on to the full series with Triangle Staff. You want to know what studio that is? Yeah, they have Madhouse working on it this year as well. Well, technically they worked on the anime with Triangle Staff, but still, it's pretty surreal to see something like Madhouse talking about something that's Magical Girl related. Granted, I have a few that are still on my resume with that studio when it comes to their Magical Girl library, but we'll have to see when their time comes. Or maybe it's because I'm a sucker for Madhouse. Either way. And while I admit that this year's series may have taken a while for me to get through, especially because of how long it took despite having 19 episodes, I must confess that, despite all of what I said, however, let's not waste any more time. This is Magic Users. Before we start with this anime, I think I should point out the fact that while we're still talking about both of these individually, I think it's only fitting to talk about its OVA before we get any further, mostly because the OVA came out before the anime did. Yeah, this is one case where I should have done that with Vampire Princess Miyu, but hey, I didn't know they were both canon to begin with, so apologies in advance if I didn't do that before. It's just pretty weird for me to see OVA start first before its anime. Though admittedly, I still think that's worth anything else anyway. So let's talk about the OVA before we get any further. Our series starts off with our main character, Sai, a clumsy yet still determined young girl who wants to become a magician. Yeah, I thought at first it was a witch due to the costume, if anything, but no, it's actually magicians. I'm guessing that magicians have witches' hats too, but I'll take whatever I can. Thankfully, Sai, however, while she does get the hang of wanting to become a magician, it's here where we find out that she's not all it was cracked up to be. Despite being klutzy and everything like that, she still wants to become a magician, considering that her friend is by her side want to do with magic as well, except for maybe a few that want to do something else besides. However, the other two girls who actually are in the series with Sai to be by her side are Nanaka, which I'm just going to say right now, at first glance she does act very brash and she didn't want to become a magician. She's also does care for Sai in a lot of ways, even if she does have a short temper every now and then. She didn't want to become a magician at first, but later on in the OVA she does manage to get onto the situation so she can be there for Sai, and the other girl being Akane, who, while I don't know if I can call her an airhead, despite that, however, she's also very arrogant and also known for her beauty and such, because she's very popular with the boys and as well as a popular idol and model as well. But she also does care for her friends, so at least we can't say she has a spoiled attitude in spite of what the people might have you believe. But they're not the only characters in this year's series, believe it or not. One of them being the president of the Magic Users Club, Takayo, who I will say I don't want to get into his personality too much right now because I want to save it for later, but the most you gotta say is that he does have this tendency to fantasize the girls, mostly Sai, about being around him and be all flirty, which I'm just gonna say I'm glad these characters are teenagers, but still, chill out, dude. And the vice president, Abaratsubo. Finally, I got the name right. Sorry, it's just that before, when I was trying to write the script, I had a hard time saying his name all the time. I kept pronouncing it wrong. But yeah, Abaratsubo is the vice president of the Magic Users Club, but he's also a very big flirt when it comes to Takayo. And I mean really, making him look like Bonkaron can't stop flirting with other guys in Pataliro, but unlike Bunker on, I will say that Aparozzo only sticks to one boy, so at least there's that. But let me tell you, his crush is huge, if anything to judge by. I guess that's an understatement if you ever do want to watch this series for yourself, but you take your pick if you ever do find out for yourself. Together, all five of them, in the OVA at least, have to do whatever they can to stop the aliens from doing anything they can to prevent it from Earth being destroyed. Yeah, that last bit that I just said about aliens, believe it or not, the OVA itself mostly had aliens in it, which I'm not so sure if I can put them on screen for you, lovely people, because if I did that, I'm pretty sure I'm probably gonna get age restricted, because these aliens have tentacles or eyeballs that come out of them. I'm not so sure if I can even call them eyeballs or anything, but the series itself calls them eyes, so I guess I can roll with that. But yeah, you may have noticed I've talked about how the series is premise in the OVA, but I'll get to the anime in a bit. But one thing you need to know is that the anime itself is basically Magical Girl and sci-fi with a bit of comedy sprinkled into it. But here's another thing that I already mentioned the other two, and yes, before you asked, they are indeed magical boys without transformation. Yeah, I know that I'm going to go on a side bit when I say this, but I think having magical boys, especially during the 90s, it must have been pretty rare for a series like that to have something with magical girls to be in it. Usually magical boys come into a series where there's just a group of boys and no girls in it, and the girls would work separate by themselves, or there's usually barely, if any, female characters to be half of. I'm not saying I don't like magical boys. Personally, I always wanted to talk about more about magical boys in my podcast, and yes, before you say anything, those will come up in the future sometime, but the only things I've only talked about that were magical boy related were Q High Earth Defense Club in 2024, if you recall from those years. My god, these years are going so fast, I'm not being kidding about that. And Magical Girl Ore back when I was doing my other Magical Girl shows into the podcast back in 2025 of last year. And I'm not saying that there's nothing you can do with Magical Boys, but most of the time, especially the ones I've seen so far, were usually parodies, which there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I feel like that's really the only thing that they usually do. However, when it comes to something like Q High Earth Defense Club, while the OVA was basically sci-fi and the other series we'll get to in a bit was basically something like that, it goes straight off to say it's mostly a comedy, and therefore it's just a straight comedy instead of one that you may expect. And again, I'm not gonna lie, I've always wanted to see more magical boys, and before you say anything, yes, I will have more in my podcast, like I said. I just need to find more of it because, well, I think I'm breaking your heart when I say this, but does anyone even know more magical boy shows? And I'm talking about shonen or say their love interest or anything, though that is a topic I think I should really get into sometime. But I'm saying this as in someone who doesn't see magical boys all that often. I usually just see shonen be their usual ways of how they fight and all. As opposed to Magical Users Club, while it's not really anything I would remotely recommend to everyone out there, it really goes without saying that it's one of those series that doesn't follow the parody, if anything. It's strictly on magic, and what's more, these are real people really using magic for their own good so they can fight off the aliens in the anime, while the series itself really has something different than that. I know I keep going back and forth on these two necessarily, but the OVA doesn't really give you that much anyways, even if it is 6 episodes. I guess we have a Shamanic Princess that's bloodline coming on our heads. Then again, I did talk about Shamanic Princess, so you can find that tip in my podcast. It's not that hard to look, if anything, to judge by. By the time this video goes out, I think it'll be 2 months it'll be released, if anything. But that being said, I will say, while I don't really mind the story in its OVA, I will say that the characters themselves do take time to get used to if you ever do want that. And I mean that when it comes to having the tropes you've seen before. We have the klutzy girl, the brash girl, the arrogant yet still charming in her own way kind of girl. We have the nerd yet still managed to do whatever he can kind of boy, and as well as the pretty boy. Not any of those traits are bad necessarily, they're just ones that you've seen before, though they do get more in depth as time goes on, but still. I should also point out that while I do like the series in of itself, however, you might be wondering why it took me so long to watch it for 2 weeks while I was still doing that topics video before. Well, it's mostly because, like I said, my schedule is not the greatest when it comes to that. And when it comes right down to it, Magic Users Club, while 19 episodes aren't that bad, I will say that the OVA itself really didn't seem like they did say you can watch this in your own leisure and think, oh, we're already done with that. Though I'm not gonna lie, like if there was Shimeric Princess, I had to find out if these here were already in order. I should really point out that this is another lineup with Shimeric Princess, which I know I keep bringing that series up for this video, but I have my reason why that is, because, get this, when I was watching this on a website, somehow they put the OVA after the anime, which doesn't make any sense because when I looked it up, it's established that the anime came out after the OVA was finished, which, given the fact that they said it was already finished at the end of its OVA, did seem kind of confusing at first, because for some reason they said it was the end, but I'm guessing they really didn't think it would be an OVA to an anime, but I guess that's probably why they thought, hey, we might as well make it into an anime thanks to another studio that Madhouse can help us out with. And yes, before you say anything, this was a few years before Triangle Staff defunct anyways. If anything, I feel kind of bad now that I don't talk about a lot of Triangle Staff stuff, but I haven't really experienced a lot of their stuff outside of Shimeric Princess, this series, and a little bit of Serial Experiments Lane. Though truth be told, I haven't seen all of the series yet, so don't quote me on it just yet, please. But I should probably talk about its anime and talk about its formula just for a bit, because it's not really sci-fi related, if anything to judge by. I know that's going to sound kind of disappointing to any of my sci-fi fans out there if you want Magical Girl and sci-fi mixed into it, but the OVA itself did do a decent job of what they did, even though I think it could have been a little better if they actually paced out a little more to the overall in anime as well, but well, I think I should point out that these characters, you think that's up there with a lot of other Magical Girl shows, they would at least have an introduction of how these girls met each other and everything, especially in the anime. But I'm not gonna lie, they didn't even do that. No, I'm not kidding. Both the OVA and the anime didn't really show how they met each other or anything, and what's more, they really just went to being a team right away without having any sort of ways of doing it. Now, you might argue that not Hanako had her own moments where she didn't want to become a magician, and then later on she went to becoming a magician by being on Sai's side and everything, as well as everyone else. But I think that's more like saying that she was already in the club, rather than saying, how did I get in this club to begin with, and why am I still here by the end of the day? Which further begs the question of why you took it to begin with, but we wouldn't have a conflict otherwise, I guess. I guess the anime in of itself is a little different than you may expect, but that also brings up to someone's detriment to a genre, and that being slice. Now, don't misunderstand me. I personally don't mind slice of life because it actually does take a break from the overacting action when you get right down to it. But whereas the OVA itself had more of a story, this one almost, and I say almost, had an episodic feel to it. Yeah, I say almost because guess what? Most of the time when you watch the anime for yourself, well, I will say the animation, personally, I like the anime's animation a little better. Maybe it's because I'm biased because I love Madhouse as of now because that's my fixation, despite having issues, but that's beside the point. Anyways, yeah, the anime itself, while it looks a lot cleaner and a lot shinier than the OVA did, because, well, I'm starting to notice that OVA seems to have a lot duller colors than the anime does. I'm not gonna lie, the anime itself did have this episodic feel to it. Like, it has slice of life, but still magic to it. But I hear some of you guys saying, how can that possibly be? How can you mix both Magical Girl and slice of life to it? And personally, there have been plenty of shows that did this formula, even before Magic Users Club became a thing, and afterward. And I'm not saying that because of all the other things that people keep saying, oh, if you have slice of life in another genre, there's no way you could balance that out. Yes, there is. There's just a way of doing it. Let me explain. I talked about High Guardian Spice before in my Magical Girl podcast, and in it, while it doesn't really have the worst slice of life out there, it also goes without saying that they botched it up more than you may know. And why is that? Well, I guess you could say there is magic in High Guardian Spice. What really bothers me and a lot of other people is that the writing itself makes it look more like it's more on a slice of life at school, and they don't really do anything to follow it. I mean, sure, there is magic used used in High Guardian Spice, but that's like saying, oh, we have magic, but we might as well not explain to you how that works because you're smart enough to know how magic works, which, given the fact that magic works in a variety of ways, does not mean that we're all going to know how does it work. You need to explain how that works in. And what's more, the slice of life in High Guardian Spice, at least to me, felt more like it was overshadowing its magic. And don't get me wrong, I know that it's hard to balance out slice of life along with another genre, and I'm not just talking about Magical Girl necessarily. I'm talking about any genre out there, but you need to know that if you overshadow one genre onto the next genre, it's going to feel so claustrophobic that you can't even explain what's going on. Plus, you're going to forget what the other genre is by the end of the week if you ever do so. Whereas this series, while the magic and slice of life are still in limbo, you're going to find out that the magic in here is mostly used for the episode's plot, if anything. Sorry, where was I? Oh yeah. Yeah, one thing I will say is that while the episodes themselves are very formulaic, basically the characters are going through some kind of hassle with the shenanigan, and they'll use some kind of magic in order to do that already. See, this is one and I feel like High Guardian Spice should have been in the first place. Like, if you can't really focus on magical transformations or anything, you can always use the magic as your own shenanigans. Though you're probably going to say they did that, but I'm just saying I don't really think they succeeded with High Guardian Spice. Magic Users Club, I think, nailed at it, but I get why some people wouldn't like the episodic feel to it. Somewhat. And I think that's kind of a redundant statement to make because I think that you can still make magic be a shenanigan in its own way because there are uses in ways that magic can be used in ways that you probably would find unpredictable. And Magic Users Club kind of does that in some cases here and there. Granted, I know that some people are going to say to me that it's kind of hard to follow at times, but if you ever do follow it by paying attention to what goes on, you can pretty much bet that the characters, despite having their different personalities, do find ways of finding out what one's like anyways. But there is one character in this year's series that I think we should go over before we get into the Takayo situation, as I'm going to call it. Yeah. This character, Jeruko, or Jericho, yeah, for some reason they like to mispronounce the name, or maybe it's because I'm bad with my English or something, I wouldn't know. But Jericho here is really not all of what he seems to be, despite looking very androgynous for his own good anyways. Seriously, I don't even know if I can call him a pretty boy or somewhere around to say, a lot of other characters. But yeah, this character is not all of what he appears to be, but for some reason Sai was the only one who saw him until the other characters start catching on, and despite having him in part of the Magic Users Club near the end of the series, it turns out that he's more than what he is. Seeing other characters through their own abilities and all that, that's their weaknesses and stuff like that, and probably causing trouble. Now granted, this doesn't come until near the end of the series, as I alluded to, but it also further begs the question of what he was trying to do at this point, and I shit you not, he's not some kind of twist you were going to expect, because get this, he was Sai's magic. Yeah, this is something that I'm pretty sure that a lot of people would have found more about anyways until we found out about Mickey, one of the mentors in the series that comes into it later on. Well, I say one of the mentors, but she's actually the only mentor we see in this year's series. And Mickey, while she is someone that Sai writes to in her own little journal, if anything, especially because she does her pictures, everything that her sister usually picks on for, and I think I actually do like Mickey, despite her only one-time appearance into it. Yeah, we don't learn Mickey until later on, but still, having her as a mentor to come help our characters in a little bit doesn't really hurt all that much. But I can't help but think that I can't to blame the people who would watch the series and think they could have had her in sooner, if anything, to judge by. Like I said, she doesn't come until a little tidbit near the end of the series, and even then, it just feels like it's pretty sad that we don't get to see her all that often. I guess they don't want to have her overstay her welcome, but that doesn't mean they couldn't even try having her have a little cameo here and there. I'm guessing they couldn't think much about her besides she's the mentor figure or plot device. Yeah, I don't like saying this, but if you're gonna have a character as a plot device, I still find that kind of not lazy, to be honest. Like, the characters could have at least tried to figure it out, but granted, I get they're kids, so I guess I can let that slide. But But let's talk about Takayo a little more because I honestly feel like if I don't, someone who's probably a fan of the series is probably going to point out for me. So let's talk about Takayo for. Now, I don't want to speak too much on Takayo's behavior, if anything to judge by, but honestly, when it comes to him trying to see his own imagination to a point where he hallucinates where the girls, mostly Sai, around to his own behavior around what would happen if he did try to hook up with them, that's almost nothing compared to another character I have yet to talk about, Mitsuru Himeyama. And, I hate to go there, but despite this being somewhat of more of a shoujo series than anything, can we talk about Takayo's own sense of humor, if it was, when it comes to this here character? For all you need to know is that basically whatever happened to both Takayo and Mitsuya, you're just gonna get flashbacks about how Mitsuya actually treated Takayo, all because of how she kept teasing him and all that. And what's more, every time she appears on screen, he basically looks at her. I don't even know how I can say this on screen either. Her breasts? Yeah, I don't like saying that out loud, if anything, because I feel like I might trigger someone, if anything. And this is something I didn't bring up in my hey gushing over magical girls video, but I have to ask this question. Do people really think that all boys are really nothing more than perverts? Because shit like this to me is probably why I could only find this stuff inappropriate, if anything. Now, granted, there are times where you can make the humor inappropriate and still make it laughable if it's uncomfortable to make it something humorous. But when this character comes on screen, while I don't necessarily hate her, I personally feel like they're only there just to drive up the fan service and say, hey, we know that this here series is made for girls, but let's make it for boys in mind as well. I hate to go there as well, but I think even the creator of Princess Tutu, who gave us these characters, actually should at least know that there's a thing called boundaries. Or maybe that's something that the other writer has written, because like I said, there were two writers who wrote for the manga, so maybe it is just me feeling uncomfortable. And I'm not saying that because, oh, you really can't stand the whole fan service or anything. No, as I said before, I don't mind fan service in a series as long as it actually has a purpose to it. But when this character comes on screen, I'm just here saying, oh my god, not this shit again. Not the whole fan servicey thing where you make it uncomfortable. And then I think that's kind of the thing. I'm not saying you can't put fan service in your series as long as you actually know what you're doing with it so it won't look all perverted. But I'm just saying, guys, I feel like if you say that all boys are perverts, then you probably think that that's like saying that all girls are gonna say, oh, they're all disgusting bags just to get with every boy out there. I'm just saying, a runaround Sue is not something I don't think anyone wants to go through, but that's beside the point. But anyways, I don't really have that much to say beyond what it is, but you might have noticed I said the creator of Princess Tutu, and I did because guess what? This here art style, these here character designs were made from the creator of Princess Tutu herself, Aiko Eito, a character her designer who worked on other stuff before and after this, but you might mostly know her for Princess Tutu and as well as Sailor Moon, which is more popular than the latter of which, but still, honestly, I don't mind the animation, despite some weird movements here and there, but Madhouse is known for having to know when to put the action. Well, I say action, but it's not really anywhere near as action-based like some other stuff that they've made, but that's beside the point. Anyways, that was Magic Users Club, and it's pretty good. I wouldn't call it the greatest series out there, but still pretty good in spite of all that. However, if there's one thing I will say about this series is that I feel pretty bad it never really went as far as it did when it comes to DVD sales because, like I said, you're only going to find used copies. And when I started watching this series for myself, the last episode seemed to have those popping sounds, which I thought it was my phone, which it wasn't, but no, it was just that. Anyways, thankfully they have it on YouTube, if anything, so if you ever do want to check this series for yourself, go right ahead and do just that anyways, while the time is still there. Yeah, I'm not so sure how many times these anime studios want to get rid of these pirate uploads, if anything, but if you're wondering why I say these pirate uploads are being a problem, well, that's probably why you're never going to find too many releases out there. And I know that's not a problem for most people out there, but like I said, if you're not going to put any releases out there, then there's no point of just saying you should really go on anyways. Like I said in the Cutie Honey Flash video, it's best for you to at least try to make a release outside of Japan, if anything to judge by, but I'm not so sure how many people do that when it comes to old series. Or if they do, it's probably harder to find because they barely announce some things here and there, which is even more frustrating when someone like me, who has to go through the process of finding these here shows. But all of that tangent aside, I don't really think Magic's Users Club is a bad series. I still find it pretty good, by all things considered, but I'm not gonna lie, even if you aren't into something that's sci-fi or slice of life related, you're probably not gonna change your much mind about this here series otherwise. But with that said, well, like I said, I know it's gonna be summertime soon, and I'm not the greatest when it comes to summer videos. But if I ever do make another Magical Girl podcast, it won't be until whenever I come back. Because, like I said, summertime's not the best time for me to do videos. Just hopefully that brat doesn't say, oh, I should end myself just because I have my ways of taking care of my family or what shit. I'm not gonna get over that, am I? Yeah, needless to say, that's all I have to say in the matter. That was Magic Users Club, and well, whenever I do come back, it'll either be a Magical Girl podcast video, it will either be a topics video, or maybe a live stream. I really don't know. But the live streams are something I don't know more about. But even with that said, I thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time, whenever I come back, and I'll hopefully have another video for you guys. But until then, I'll see you all then. See you soon.